Hello, you wonderful people. Today we're going to continue building out our video summarizer that we're building with Next.js and Strapi 5. We're going to pick up where we left off. Now, before someone asks what's wrong with me, I do have autoimmune disease that I had for the rest of my life, and sometimes my face tends to break out, including my body. It is what it is. If it's distracting, don't worry. I'm not going to show my face the whole time on the video, but I know someone's in the comments going to ask, so might as well answer the preemptive trolling comment here. But anyway, taking a look at our application here, this is what we have so far. We created our top nav. We have our hero section. We have our features, our footers. We even implemented not found page. So if we navigate here, we have not found, go back home, of course. So today we're actually going to take a look how to build our sign in section. We're going to start by creating our form and learning about Next.js Server Actions to be able to submit those forms and to handle authentication through Strapi. If you haven't seen the previous videos, I'll make sure to link in the description to the last video, or you could find them on this channel. You could take a look at our page, click on videos, and you'll see the latest videos that I did the last part 3 of the series, and now we're moving on to part 4. And this whole video series is based on a blog series that I made for Strapi that you could check out here. And the reason why I'm showing you this, if you're seeing the code snippets that I'm using, you're going to be able to pull them from this blog post, because who wants to see me type anyway? And before we jump into the video, you can find the repo to this project where you could take a look where we are. You could navigate to my name, YT, tutorial next summarized with dashes, and you will be able to see the main repo. The main repo will have up to date. And if you look here, you could see that we had part 3 that we completed. So now we are on part 4. Start if you want to make sure that you have the same exact code as I do, even though I'm providing these repos. Make sure that you follow along with the project coding these things yourself. Even though we're using code snippets to speed up the process, the most important part is for you to look at the code, work through the code, understand what the code does with my explanation to make sure that you understand what you're doing instead of just following along for the sake of following along. But with that being said, let's jump into our code editor. We're going to start by creating a route group. A route group allows you to group relevant items by following this example, where we're able to, instead of calling our route with just a name, we could put it between the parentheses. And that way we're able to group similar pages without affecting the URL path. So what does that mean? So in our project, if we navigate to our app folder, and let's say I create a new folder called test, and inside here, I want to create a new folder called sign in. And inside here, we create a file called new file page.tsx and paste our simple React component. And we're just going to call it sign in route. And when you restart your application, for me to be able to navigate to that sign-in page, I would have to do the name of the folder test, and then we would do sign in and click enter. And here, yes, don't worry about the styling. We have our sign-in route. But notice how we had to go test and sign in. But what if I want to not have this middle path? I don't want to influence the structure of the URL path. What I want is to have sign in and sign up page being accessed this way. So that is why we're going to use our route groups to group those together without affecting the URL path, which will allow us to navigate to localhost 3000 sign in. So let's take a look how we can accomplish this. In our code editor, I'm going to go ahead and delete this folder. And instead, we're going to create a new folder. And inside parentheses, we're going to say auth, and this is going to be our grouped routes. Inside here, we're going to create a new file called layout.tsx, which we'll come back to in just a moment. This is going to have our grouped styling that both of our children, which is going to be our sign in and sign up page, will inherit. So let's create a new folder called sign in. And inside here, let's create a new file, page.tsx. And now let's create another folder. We're going to call it sign up. And inside sign up, let's create a new file called page.tsx. Let's go back to our layout.tsx file. And here we're going to create basic React component. We're going to call it auth layout. It takes in children, which is going to be our sign in page and sign up page. And that's going to apply our styles that are in this layout, which is basically our dark background, and center all the items in the center to both those pages. So now before we test it out, let's go ahead back to our sign in page and add a basic component. Again, just a basic function component with a div that says sign in. And VS Code sometimes freaks out. This is perfectly correct. And let's now go to our sign up folder with page.tsx and create a placeholder for our sign up route. Now that we have our layout, our sign up page, and our sign in page, we should be able to see it in our front end. So now when I navigate to sign in, notice you'll see our sign in component showing, which is not much yet. And if I go to sign up, you would see the same sign up route. And notice how here we are not needing to put auth before because we are grouping our routes without affecting the URL path here. Now that we have our group routes, we can continue to creating our forms for sign in and sign up. And again, you could always use this blog post as reference. That's why I created it in the first place. Now, as we scroll down, we're going to navigate to the area where we're going to be greeted with a section build our sign in and sign up form. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead, copy this code snippet for our sign in form.tsx file, and let's go ahead and create that in our project. In VS Code, let's navigate to source, our components folder, and inside this folder, let's create a new folder called forms. Forms, and inside forms, let's create a new file called sign in form.tsx. And let's paste in our previously copied code. If we scroll to the top, we're going to see that VS Code is complaining because we have to install the card, the label, and input components from ShadCN UI. If you forgot how we did it from the previous video, we are using ShadCN UI components as a library to make our app pretty. If we navigate to the components, we could scroll down and find our card component. What's cool, you could see the code snippet, how to use it, but more importantly, we want to grab this command, npx ShadCN at latest add command. We're going to copy it. And that's what we're going to use to add our card, label, and input components. So here in my terminal, I'm going to say add card, label, and input. Click enter. It's going to go ahead and do its magic. Make sure that you're inside your Next.js project. In the terminal here, I'm going to paste our command, and I'm going to say I want to add our card, label, and input. It's going to go ahead and do its magic. Once done, it's going to show us where it went and installed our components. So inside of our Next.js application, you notice that VS Code stopped complaining. And if we take a look inside our UI folder, you could see our card, input, and label components have been added. So now let's quickly walk through this code. This is a standard React component, and we are using the form element because that's how we're going to handle our form submission as we learn more about it. In this particular example, we have two inputs with our label and our input to get our user identifier, which could be either user email or username. And then we have our section with the label input to get the user password. And then we will submit the form using the button here at the bottom. And if you're wondering, hey, Paul, you don't have any use state. How do you capture the value from the input? Well, later in this video, we're going to find out that we will target the form with this name attribute to get the value based on the name that we give. In this case, you'll be able to look up this field by this identifier based on the name. And we'll see how to accomplish this in a little bit. But for now that we have our form, let's go ahead and add it to our page. So let's navigate to our app folder, go to auth, and we are in our sign in page. So here, let's first import it just like this. And finally, let's use our form inside our component. Perfect. Now let's do the same for our sign-up form. So navigate back to Forms, create a new file called signupform.tsx, very original. Inside our blog post, let's navigate to our signupform.tsx code snippet, go ahead and copy it. And here we're going to paste it in. Once everything is pasted in, this follows the similar pattern. We have our form element, and here, because this is our sign-up form, we have 3 inputs. Our username input, our email input, and our password input. And again, we're going to submit our form based on the button here. Now that we have our form, let's navigate back to our sign-up folder, page.tsx file. Let's go ahead and import our component here at the top. And let's use it here. Nice. Now that we have our sign up form and our sign in form, we can go ahead and check out our front end. Let's start our application in case you stopped it. Now, once our application restarts, we are able to click on the sign in button to see our sign in form. And if we navigate to sign up, we see our sign up form. Awesome. So now let's take a look how we could actually submit data to our form. So taking a look at a blog post, we're going to talk about using server actions. So let's walk ourselves slowly through the process. We're going to start talking about the basics of server actions here, but we'll finish this in the follow-up video just to keep this one from getting too long. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to copy this basic function, and we'll talk through it in just a moment. But we are going to create a new folder where we're going to have our actions. So back in our code, inside our client project, inside source, we have our component folder, we have our data folder, and that's where we're going to do it. Open up your data folder, we have our loaders. Let's create a new folder called actions, just like so. And inside the actions folder, we're going to create a new file that's going to be called auth actions. And all the actions responsible for our auth are going to live here. Let's paste in our code snippet. And all it is, it's a JavaScript function, but it is going to run as an action because we're using this use server. So now that we have our action, how can we trigger it? How can we display this console log? So let's go back to our components inside our forms. Let's go to our sign up form. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to import our action right here. Now that we have our action using the action attribute, to which we're going to pass our register user action. Now, even though on our button, we did not add a explicit type submit, when we click the button, it is going to submit our form. But if we want to be more specific, we could go ahead and add our submit type. Nice. Now what will happen when we click the submit button, our form is going to trigger this action that should console log this on our server. I'm going to go ahead and restart my application, make sure that it's running. And now when I click on sign up, notice that we're getting our console log here on the server. So we know that our action has been triggered. So now that we know the basics, you create your action, then you import it into your code base and you add it to your form. And anytime you press your submit button, it's going to trigger the form, which will trigger our action. And that's what we saw. So now let's take a look how we could access our elements. Notice here on our form, we have an input with a name attribute, username, another one with the name attribute with an email, and another name attribute with the password. Whenever we submit our action, we have access to the form data. So we could actually pull all the items from the form data. So I'm going to say const fields equal. And by the way, you can use object from entries, form entries, but we are going to do it this way. We're going to say username formData.get, and this is using that name attribute. We're going to do the same thing for email and password. And now all we're going to do is console log our fields. So let's give it a try again. At the moment, we're not doing any form validation, which is okay, but I'm just going to say Paul Bratz, paul@email.com, and the password is going to be test user. Now when I click sign up, this should trigger our form, which should trigger our action. And if we take a look at our console, so notice we are able to see our form data in our action, which is pretty awesome. Nice. We now have our simple register user action where we'll be able to add necessary logic to be able to call our Strapi endpoint to create our username. But before we do that, let's cover one more step here. What if I do something here, but I want to return the response from this action to my signup form and have the access to the return values? So we could actually accomplish this in Next.js using use form state from React. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it in. Next, we're going to create an initial state. We're going to keep it simple. So after line 18, here we're going to create initial state variable, which will have data set to null for now. Now let's use our use form state hook. It's going to take our register user action, our initial state, and in return, we'll get our form state, which will have the state returned from our action. And then we'll have this form action that we will call from our action here. And finally, to fix our register user action complaining, let's navigate back to our auth action. And before form data, we now have access to previous state. We're going to say it's any to keep things simple. And now we are able to return our data. We're going to return previous state first, and then we're going to return our data attribute, which will have our fields just like that. Nice. So if we navigate back to our signup form, notice TypeScript stopped complaining. And the last thing we need to do, we just need to console log our form state data, which is going to come back from our action. So now let's submit our form. And since this is a client component, this console log will be available on the client. And just so it's easier to see, I'm going to put it between these console logs here. So let's try this again. In our signup form, I'm going to inspect. So now what we're able to do, let's fill out our form. Test user, test at email.com, test user as password. And when I click sign up, notice that we are getting our values returned from our form, from our action that we're able to use on our front end. That is pretty awesome. I think for now, this is a good stopping point. So let's quickly do a final review of what we did, and we'll continue this in the next video. But to summarize, we created our form, which had our form elements. Currently, we're working on our sign-up form, where we had our username input, our email input, and our password input. By clicking the submit button, this is going to trigger our form submission. That's going to fire our form action. The form action will have access to form data that's based on the name attribute. And that's exactly what you see here. We have access to the form data, and we're pulling our data based on the name attribute. So we're pulling our username, email, and password. We are also able to return this to a client component using the use form state hook. This is where we implemented it. So now when our form is fired, we are able to return our data that will be available to us inside this form state. And that is exactly what we saw here on the front end. So our application is taking shape. We have our header, our hero, our features, our footer. Now in today's lesson, we created our sign-in page and sign-up page and hooked up our first action. So we'll continue building up this server action in the next video. Bye.